If I told you that a man saved his daughter from death, but at the cost of his memories, his soul, his very self, would you believe it? Zuri lives, but Bakery, her father, looks at her and doesn't know who she island. He has forgotten his wife, forgotten the smile he once loved most. The only thing he still remembers is a pair of golden eyes beneath the lake, where he pleaded for a miracle. Don't leave this video if you've ever loved someone so much that you'd be willing to sacrifice your entire self. This story is not a fairy tale. This is the truth about a father who did what no one else dared to do. The moon that night was not bright. Clouds covered it like gray silk ribbons strangling the Louisiana sky. In the eerie silence of Mawuli village, only the sound of insects' wings and the wind whistling through the ancient cassia trees remained, echoing like the sighs of ancestors. Under that darkness, a tall, gaunt man with a haggard face from countless sleepless nights knelt by the lake's edge. That was Bakery Mbe. His heels were caked with mud, his shirt soaked with sweat and dried blood, as if he had traveled a long, aimless journey, only to arrive here at this precise moment. He bowed his head. Tears streamed down, mingling with the mud, seeping into the forest grass that spread to the water's edge. His lips moved, trembling, then uttered ancient sounds, the Orisha tongue of his ancestors, which he had only heard his grandmother recite on nights meant to soothe dreams. O spirit of the water, I come not to ask for miracles. I only ask to be a father once more. Those words rang out in the still night like a forgotten prayer from 1,000 lifetimes. The lake's surface was as still as a mirror, but then, as if answering the call, a faint ripple spread from its center, quickly growing stronger, swirling like the pulse of a throbbing heart. A faint, green glow flickered, then something like shattered moonlight. But there was no moon that night. It came from beneath the water. Each ripple seemed lit from within, radiating a strange, brilliant golden light. A form emerged from the water, slowly, majestically, yet not frightening. It was a woman, or rather, a being, half human, half water. Her hair curled like ocean waves, reaching down to her waist, her skin gleaming like molten gold, but most striking were the scales covering her body, golden scales, radiant as sacred sunlight, shimmering with each movement as if alive. Her eyes were infinitely deep, not brown, not black, but the color of buried memories. Bakery trembled, not from fear, but because his heart seemed to touch something sacred, beyond the reach of words. She did not speak, but in his mind a female voice resounded, clear and cold as dew on a gravestone. You will have what you desire, but for every gift you take, I will take a piece of your soul. There was no negotiation, no explanation, only the raw truth. But Bakery needed no more words. Within him was a clear conviction. Nothing was worth more than the chance to see his daughter smile once more, to see his wife stop weeping every night. He nodded, and the lake opened its arms to embrace him, like a mother cradling her child to her chest. The water surged, enveloping his body, pulling him into a lightless abyss where memories were crushed into watery dust. A muted explosion echoed within his soul, and then everything fell silent. Above, only the false moonlight flickered on the water's surface. No one knew that a part of the man's soul had been stolen forever. But at that very moment, in a small house in the village, little Zuri jolted awake, gasping for breath, her eyes opening for the first time in days. Emily collapsed in joy. But Bakery was no longer himself. The dawn that morning was unlike any other the village of Mawuli had ever witnessed. The light didn't come solely from the sun. It seemed to radiate from within the small house of Bakery's family. The door flew open, and Emily rushed out, embracing her little daughter who stood in the yard, her large, round eyes shining as if she had never been ill. Zuri, the child who had lain motionless for weeks, was now laughing, running, and calling out to her mother in a clear voice that left the entire village stunned. The elders whispered that a miracle had occurred. The young ran to spread the news, and Emily, she could only collapse in the yard, holding her daughter and crying as if she were a mother for the first time. But in that moment, amid the chorus of jubilation, one person stood silently at the edge of the garden, like an outsider in his own family. Bakery stood there, his eyes wide as if gazing at something utterly foreign. Zuri ran toward him, raising her arms as any child would to her father, but he didn't respond. He bent down, smiled, a crooked, uneasy smile that couldn't hide his confusion. Then he stepped back, as if afraid of the child before him. In his mind, there were no images left. Not Zuri's face at birth, not her laughter, not Emily's lullabies each night. Everything, his daughter's name, her voice calling him, passed through his ears like a breeze, leaving no trace. Yet one thing lingered, smoldering. The feeling that he had to be here. A vague urge like the deepest instinct binding him, preventing him from leaving. The day passed, and people kept coming to his house, rejoicing, offering blessings, praising the miracle. But each word of congratulations was a knife plunging deeper into the void in Bakery's mind. He tried to smile, to nod, to repeat what others said, like someone learning to speak for the first time. But within him, a thick fog was spreading, swallowing every fragment of his past. He went to the lake every afternoon, as if driven by an unconscious habit. He sat for hours, listening only to the sound of the water lapping against the shore. And each time, tears would flow, not from any specific pain, but from a sense of loss he couldn't name. He no longer remembered how to fish. The net he once wove by hand was now a tangled, unfamiliar mess. The hands that had once been steady swimming in the water or rowing at night now trembled when touching the oar. The villagers began to whisper, "Must be the shock of too much happiness." But only Emily knew that something had left this man, something invisible but palpable. At night, Emily placed her hand on her husband's chest as he slept. His heart still beat, but she felt it was no longer there. Each time he looked at her, his eyes lacked the familiar spark, replaced by a thin, hazy mist, as if he were trying to see through frosted glass. Once, she brought Zuri to sit with him on the porch. The little girl sat beside him, placing her hand on his thigh, chattering about the innocent things of childhood. Bakery nodded, but his gaze drifted into the void. When Zuri said, "Papa, do you remember when I was sick?" He gave a faint smile, but didn't answer. That was when Emily knew his memories were gone. That night, Emily prayed for the first time, not for her daughter, but for her husband. She prayed for something she herself felt was selfish. "Please bring him back. He doesn't need to be whole. Just let him remember who we are." And that night, as Emily drifted into sleep, Bakery went to the lake again. This time, he didn't kneel. He only stood by the shore, staring at the still water, and whispered, not with words, but with tears. Somewhere beneath the depths, whatever had taken his memories seemed to be listening. Dear audience, please take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then continue listening to the story. There are still surprising developments ahead. Comment the number 1 if you find the story intriguing, so we know you're still here. No one knew exactly when Bakery began leaving his bed in the middle of the night. It might have been a few days after Zuri woke up, or perhaps earlier, on the very night he stood silently by the lake with an empty expression. But from then on, every night, as the moon reached its zenith, he would open the door and step outside, as if pulled by an invisible thread. He didn't walk quickly. His steps were slow, steady, like those of a sleepwalker. His mouth whispered, indistinctly, only strange, mournful sounds, like wind whistling through a torn chest. Those words were not English, nor the language spoken by the villagers, but an ancient tongue, the Orisha language, emerging from his subconscious as if ancestral spirits were stirring in their deep slumber. The village elders watched him and shook their heads. They whispered through clouds of tobacco smoke and the scent of burning incense, "His soul is split in two, half here, half at the bottom of Maoli Lake." They spoke not with fear, but with a sorrowful pity, as if watching an ancient tree rotting from within. Bakery didn't remember going, but he remembered the dreams. Fragmented, hazy images came to him night after night, disjointed without beginning or end, just shards of memory floating in the darkness. He saw himself as a child, small, sitting in the lap of a gray-haired woman, her arms cradling him, singing softly. The river before him flowed backward. The water didn't rush to the sea, but curled back to its source, as if time itself were reversing second by second. The water's surface reflected his young face, then shattered, only to reassemble in faint golden light. Each time that light touched his heart, a sharp, agonizing pang shot through him. In some dreams, he saw the mermaid. She stood far from the shore, neither approaching nor retreating. Her curly hair dripped wet. Her golden scales gleamed beneath the water. Her face neither smiling nor angry. Only her eyes, deep and sad as an abyss, stared straight at him, as if waiting. But what frightened him most was not those eyes. It was the face standing beside her. The face of a man he hadn't thought of in years, his father. He said little, only looking at Bakery, placing a hand on his shoulder and softly saying, "Remember why you became a man." Just one sentence, but each time he woke, Bakery's heart pounded like the village drums during a festival, and his chest felt as if it were being torn in two. He didn't remember why he lived, but every cell in his body seemed to be screaming something that had been silenced. Those dreams brought no peace. They left him exhausted each morning, his body visibly wasted away, his eyes sunken as if carrying the dreams of all his ancestors. Emily saw it, but she didn't know what to do beyond letting it be, as if each night her husband was sinking deeper into a world she couldn't enter to save him. One night, as Bakery stood by the lake, the wind blew stronger than usual. The lake's surface rippled, but not loudly. It was as if it were beckoning. And he nearly stepped into the water, if not for Zuri waking at that moment, running out and calling from afar. Her voice pulled him back from the edge, just in time. The rain that night wasn't heavy, only pattering softly on the wooden roof like the slow beat of a lonely heart. Emily sat in the darkness, her back against the wall, staring toward the bedroom door, where Bakery lay in deep sleep, or perhaps merely a body lying there, devoid of feeling. She had lost count of how many nights had passed like this, when the silence between them weighed heavier than any tears. Since Zuri's recovery, Emily had hoped for another miracle, that her husband would return to who he once was. But with each passing day, she felt more and more like she was living with a stranger. He still swept the leaves, fetched water, sat at the dinner table on time, but his eyes were no longer present in what he did. At times, Emily felt as though she were living with the shadow of the man she once loved. She had endured. She had hoped. But tonight, as she watched him lying there, falsely serene, she knew she could no longer keep this inside. Emily stepped into the room. In the dim darkness, she sat on the edge of the bed, her hand grasping her husband's, cold and limp, like holding the hand of someone lost. She didn't shout, didn't accuse. She only asked one question, like a drowning person asking if the water was still warm. Do you still love me, or are you just a shell living in this house? Bakery opened his eyes. He didn't react like someone hurt. He only looked at her, a vacant gaze, as if hearing an unfamiliar language. Then, suddenly, he burst into tears, not from emotion, not from love, but because he didn't know why he was crying. That moment made Emily pull her hand back, not out of anger, but out of fear. Fear that the man before her was no longer the one she had loved, no longer the one who knew why he shed tears. The next morning, Emily left the house. She told no one, taking nothing but a headscarf and an old piece of cloth embroidered with an ancestral symbol. She walked through the forest south of the village, crossing rugged, moss-covered paths, to a place only the village elders still remembered by name. The Mawu Shrine, where the spirits of ancestors were believed to still stand guard. The shrine's keeper was a tiny old woman, her hair white as ash, her blind eyes seeing as if they never missed a single soul. Without Emily saying a word, she already knew why she had come. In a room thick with the scent of herbs and old ash, the woman sat down, pulling from under the table a small basket filled with white seashells. Mawu didn't divine with words. She only dropped the shells onto a cloth, listening to the sound of their fall, then pursed her lips as if the wind had spoken something. After a long while, she looked up and whispered, "Your husband made a pact with the lake's spirit. He traded his memories to save your daughter. But it's not too late. His soul isn't entirely lost, only shattered. There is still a way back." Emily clenched her fists, her heart pounding with each beat as if awakening itself. "What way?" The old woman handed her a seashell carved with the symbol of waves and said, "You must find the spring of memory's waters. It is where the water knows the names of all who have lived and loved. If you place his hand upon it and call the names of the 3 people he loved most, the spring may help piece his soul back together." Emily didn't know where the spring of memory's waters was, but in her heart, a spark of light flickered for the first time in days of darkness. She clutched the seashell as if it were the last lifeline for her family. The night wind whistled through the window, cracks like the whispers of ancient spirits. In the room where Zuri slept, something was stirring beyond ordinary senses. The 10-year-old girl, who had crossed the fragile line between life and death, suddenly woke in the middle of the night, her eyes wide open, but not from a nightmare. Zuri listened. A call, soft as if rising from the earth, from the depths of the lake, from within her own blood. She sat up, stepped out of bed, and looked out the window toward Mawuli Lake. The next morning, before the sun could burn away the mist, Zuri came to Emily and spoke in a voice light as the breeze. "Mom, I heard the lake talking to me." Emily looked up, her hand pausing mid-task in the kitchen. "What did the lake say to you?" Zuri answered slowly, each word as if etched into her memory. "The lake told me to play the drum. It told me not to be afraid of the water." Those words sent a chill through Emily's blood. They weren't the playful inventions of a child. They were the ancient lullaby, passed down only to the female seers, those of the bloodline who could hear the voices of spirits in the water. Emily had never told Zuri about this, and now she knew. The flow of memory had begun to stir. Without hesitation, Emily took her daughter to Drum Peak, a highland believed to be the closest point to the spirits of ancestors. Only those of ancient blood could enter. Others would lose their way or collapse. The journey was long and fraught with challenges. They crossed paths covered in tangled roots, passed through dense fog that obscured the way, where even sunlight dimmed as if afraid to touch the sacred. But each time Emily wanted to stop, Zuri pulled her mother's hand, her eyes shining as if guided by something unseen. At last, they reached the peak, where the air seemed to still. The wind blew but wasn't cold. The scent of wildflowers mingled with the aroma of sacred wood, easing the heart. And there, beneath a stone pavilion, was Mawu, as if she had known they would come. No surprise, no questions. She only nodded, then turned and returned with an object wrapped in red cloth. Inside was a small drum, its skin taut and shimmering like moonlight, its edges woven with braided hair and beads from the ancestral tree. The drum's surface was carved with ancient symbols, each marking a spirit, a thread of memory too vast to name. She placed the drum in Zuri's hands and said, "Only when blood and memory meet will the soul awaken." Emily held her breath. Zuri clutched the drum to her chest and began to play. The sound wasn't loud, wasn't rapid, but it carried far like a beat, striking the water's surface, striking the hearts of people, striking the marrow of things long asleep. And back at home, where Bakery sat silently on the porch, his hand suddenly twitched. His heart pounded, not from fear, but because deep in his chest, something stirred as if answering a call from far away. He didn't understand why, but tears fell again. And this time, not from emptiness, but because something was returning. The drum had struck the forgotten soul. But would it be strong enough to open the gate to the spring of memory's waters? Or was it merely the echo of something already too late? The night was full moon, but shrouded by heavy layers of clouds, like unspoken sorrow yet to be named. Emily woke to an eerie emptiness. The front door was ajar, the wind blowing through as if carrying a warning. Bakery was no longer in the house. The village awoke in chaos. The elders quietly lit fires to pray. Children were startled awake, crying from an unease that spread through the air. Emily stood on the porch, her eyes frantic. She knew the time had come. Zuri, from behind, clutched her mother's arm, the sacred drum still held to her chest, nodding silently. Without anyone to lead, they ran together toward Mauli Lake, the place where it had all begun. As they neared the lake's edge, the sky turned a strange shade of purple, not the hue of sunset, nor a herald of a storm. The lake's surface was no longer still, but swirled in a vortex, the water rising as if boiling from the depths. The wind whipped fiercely, each gust pounding against the chest. The trees around the lake shuddered, their leaves falling like tiny blades scattering to the ground. And then, the mermaid appeared. Gone was the gentle demeanor of years past. Gone was the inviting gaze. Her curly, water-soaked hair hung down, her golden scales now blazing like furious metal. Her voice rang out, not from her mouth, but from the water, the earth, the chests of those who heard. You have broken the oath. He belongs to me. Emily gripped her daughter's hand tightly, but Zuri, with an inexplicable strength, stepped forward. The wind did not deter her. The waves did not make her fall. Zuri raised the drum, closed her eyes, and began to play. The drum's sound rose, not mere sound, but the voice of memory. Each beat was a step back to the past. The girl began to sing, her young voice filled with soul, singing the ancestral lullaby that her blood remembered, a song no one had taught her, yet each note rang, as if written in her heart. The lake began to churn. Amid the dark spirals of water catching the moonlight, a blue-green light emerged, then burst into foam. From within that maelstrom, Bakery appeared. He did not stand, but floated, as if newly born from water and the past. His eyes were wide, his lips trembling. On his face, no longer the usual emptiness, was the pain of memories flooding back. He saw Emily's hand holding his on their wedding day. He saw baby Zuri's face at birth. He saw the moonlight of the first night they sat together, promising a lifetime. His tears fell, not from fear, but because, at last, he remembered who he was. But at that very moment, the wind roared ferociously. The mermaid screamed, her eyes turning into whirlpools. Her voice hissed like the shattering of stone. To return, a soul must take your place. That is the law. Bakery turned, seeing Zuri still playing the drum, her eyes blazing but her small frame beginning to tremble. Emily screamed but could not approach. A wave rose, blocking them like a boundary between life and the price to be paid. Bakery understood. If he stepped onto the shore, Zuri would be the one the lake claimed, a life exchanged. And now, the choice was no longer a miracle, but a sacrifice. Bakery knelt amidst the swirling waters. The waves were no longer as terrifying as Zuri's eyes, the eyes of a child trading her very soul to keep her father. He looked at the mermaid, but fear no longer held him. In those eyes now was a final plea, not for his own life, but for the trembling heart of the little girl standing in the sacred waters. Please, Bakery thought, as if he could send his words through the wind, through the water, or through the deepest pain in his heart. Let me bear the full consequence, but do not take my child. The air fell silent for a few seconds. The lake ceased its churning, the drum stopped, the wind no longer howled. Everything was still, like a note cut off mid-breath. The mermaid looked at him, her gaze no longer angry but probing deep into his soul, searching for the final truth in a man. Then she slowly raised her hand and cut into her palm. Blood flowed, not red, but golden, like sunlight shattering the night. She let a few drops fall into the lake. They did not dissolve, but formed glowing spirals, like doorways. Her voice rose, deeper, like a call from the depths of time. My blood grants your soul one chance, but in return, you must become the guardian of the lake forever. You cannot leave. You cannot remember everything as a mortal would. You cannot call your daughter's name, nor speak words of love to your wife. You can only protect silently. Bakery did not hesitate. He nodded, not out of acceptance of punishment, but because his heart had no other choice. He turned back. One last time. Emily nearly lunged forward when she saw his figure approaching. The water held her back, but his eyes said everything. Zuri stopped drumming, silent. Bakery stepped closer to the shore, leaned down, and kissed his wife's forehead. His hand touched her cheek as if to memorize its shape one final time. Then he knelt, embracing Zuri, the daughter he had lost twice, once to illness and now to memory. No words of farewell, only an embrace tight enough to convey everything unsaid. Then he turned away. Step by step, he retreated into the water. The lake swallowed him as if he had never emerged from it. No ripples, no echo, Emily screamed, but the wind carried her voice elsewhere. Zuri clutched her mother's hand. She did not cry. She only looked at the lake, as if understanding that, from now on, anyone who listened closely at night would hear the faint sound of a drum in the water. It was the lullaby of the lake's guardian. A heart that remained, though it could not speak its name. The years passed like an unending flow of water, but some wounds, though time covers them with a moss of memory, never fully heal. Mawuli Lake remained as silent as it was on that fateful night, but the villagers could feel it had changed, as if the place were breathing, remembering, guarding something sacred beyond human understanding. Zuri grew up in the shadow of a sacred memory. Not a shadow of darkness, but a faint glow of sacrifice. From a little girl clutching a sacred drum in the stormy night, she became a young woman with the ancestral lullaby on her lips and a heart as steadfast as the bedrock by the lake's edge. She no longer needed anyone to tell her about her father. She was his story. Every full moon, Zuri returned to the lake, dressed in white, a silk scarf tied around her forehead, and played the drum. With each beat, the lake's surface glowed as if kindled from within, a light that didn't burn but brought tears to the eyes. Children sat silently around the shore, their eyes wide, their hearts open, waiting for a story familiar, yet never old. Zuri told of a black man, not a warrior, not a king, but a father who dared to challenge ancient spirits, trading his memories, his life, just to preserve the warmth of his little daughter. He had stepped into the lake, never to return, but every drop of water there carried the oath he left behind. The story was told not merely as legend, but as a lifeblood flowing through every home, every slumber. People began to believe that if you came to the lake on a full moon night and gazed quietly into the water, you might see a figure, a tall black man with a sad face, sitting by an old rock, saying nothing, only guarding, waiting, not to be saved, but to offer hope to those who needed it, as he once did. Emily grew old, but never missed a night when Zuri played the drum. She sat in the back, by the white flowers growing near the lake, where she and her husband had once held hands for the first time. Each drum beat sounded, and she closed her eyes, as if the sound were the breath of the man she loved. No one spoke his name, but everyone knew the lake's guardian was still there. Zuri became the village's keeper of souls. Without studying under shamans, without needing titles, every wandering spirit sought her out, as if they heard the drumbeat in their blood. Whenever someone was lost or adrift, Zuri brought them to the lake, played the drum, and told the story. No sermons, only silence and the drum, like a heartbeat from the other side of the world. One night, a boy knocked on Zuri's door, his eyes swollen red, clutching a photo of his father. "He left me," the boy said. Zuri only smiled and gestured toward the lake. They went together, the drum sounded, and the water blazed with light. The boy later said that night, he saw a man sitting by the lake, looking at him, saying nothing but making him feel embraced, protected. And then the drum sounded again. Are there those born not to live for themselves, but to be a light for others to keep going? And if you come to Mawuli Lake, will you hear a heartbeat calling your name? Some stories end in tears, but others, like Bakery and Zuri's, leave behind a light, like a quiet lamp in the hearts of those who witness them. A father who traded his soul so his daughter could live. A daughter who turned memory into the rhythm of a drum to guide the way, and a lake where pain doesn't dissolve, but transforms into strength. We cannot choose where we are born, but we can choose how we live. like bakery, living not for himself, but so others could go on. And what about you? Have you ever sacrificed something for someone you love? Leave a comment below. Share your feelings after this journey. If you want to know what happens when Zuri starts hearing strange voices from the depths of the lake, or when a stranger brings an old drum back to the village, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, share this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss part 2, The Awakening of Mawuli Lake. Because sometimes what we think is the end is only the first chapter of a distant call.